Alright guys, let's talk Penguin episode 3. I have been so immensely enjoying this show. And like I said, I've said it a couple times now, but I want to reiterate that this is not the kind of show that I typically enjoy watching. I think even as we'll talk about my thoughts on this latest episode, and I have a lot of thoughts on this latest episode, but I just want to reiterate, like this, the types of shows that I enjoy personally are usually the ones that I can watch over and over again, that I can feel sort of hopeful at the end of it, and sort of, I'm a sucker for those hope springs eternal, there's always redemption, like those kinds of stories. But I'd like to think I can always appreciate a story that's not in that vein when I see it. And Penguin is obviously not in that vein. This is a story about Oz Cobb, who is clearly not a good person, but also clearly a complicated person. And while this may not be quote unquote my type of show, I'm going to say it right now. Penguin episode 3 might have been one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen. We're going to talk about it in full spoilery detail. I can't wait to talk about it because every twist and turn, every bit of pacing, every reveal, every, zig, every zag just had me so amazed at what this show is able to do. So we are going to be talking about the Penguin episode 3 in full spoilery detail. If you have not seen the episode, make sure to save this podcast, this segment, and watch it later. Come back to it once you have seen episode 3 because we are going to be talking in full spoilery detail. So episodes 1 and 2, they're starting to blur together to me because it's been such quality television. It's been 2 whole hours before episode 3 of television. Each episode is almost exactly an hour long, which is insane. Like, that's not even including credits. Including credits, it's like an hour and 6 minutes or something like that. It's been incredible to see. At the end of episode 2, we saw a partnership between Sophia Falcone and Penguin begin to develop. And we're going to see here in this episode a little bit more of that backstory unveiled. And apparently there's some animosity there between the two. And I mean, by the end of this episode, it doesn't look like it's getting any better. So let's jump into it. I've taken notes as always, and we'll kind of talk through the main story points and things I was observing as I was watching the episode. So one thing that this episode did, this episode was an episode about Vic. And I've said it, in both episode 1 and episode 2 spoiler discussions. Initially, when Vic came on and it was clear that Vic was going to become a main character, I was not so sure about that. I thought, do we really need Penguin training a kid? Do we need another extraneous, quote unquote, extraneous side character to be joining this show? Every single episode has done so much work to humanize this character, to endear him to us. And it's incredible. It's only quote unquote 2 episodes, but those 2 hours of content have done so much that by the time this episode ends, my heart broke for this character, for Vic, a character that I've only spent 2 hours with. And yet I was so heartbroken over what the decisions that he made towards the end of this episode. I was rooting for this kid, and to see him kind of fall back into the clutches of the Penguin, so to speak, it was truly devastating to me. But we start out this episode, and I thought, I was wondering, because we saw those text messages from Graciela, and I was wondering, okay, so is he, is this later? Did he find a way to sneak out and see her? And it turns out, we learn as, I think it was through the TV that they're talking about breaking news about the mayoral election, that this is actually the day of the Riddler bombs, and the day of the very end of the Batman, which I think is such an awesome thing to do. One thing I love that superhero movies and shows have been doing more and more recently, it's not recently, for the past 10 years or so, pretty much ever since Civil War and Batman v Superman, is talking about collateral damage, right? Talking about how these crazy things, right? Things falling from the sky, superheroes coming to this earth, and crime-fighting vigilantes and villains coming up, what that does to affect real people like you and me. People who are working jobs, people who are trying to make ends meet, people who have such good intentions, how the effects of these acts of heroism can, save millions of lives, but also really, unintentionally cause some things to happen. Like the way that villains rise up is because of things that heroes do. It's what Vision said in Civil War, that since Tony Stark unveiled himself as Iron Man, the rate of supervillainy has risen exponentially. And there's a reason for that. You see that here in a show like this. And so it's really great that this show understood that it needed to take some time now to humanize Vic. This is a Vic episode, and I loved it, which if you told me this during episode 1, like right at the beginning of episode 1, when we were introduced to Vic, I would have been like, that's crazy. I don't think I would have enjoyed an episode basically just about Vic, or at least emotionally centered around Vic, but here we are. And this is the backstory. So we get to see his family, we get to see his parents, we get to see Graciela, and it's just devastating. And it's sort of the classic, we see the sort of classic Spider-Man motif, right, of how he gets angry at his family, gets angry at his parents, he storms out, and he never gets to speak to them again. It's sort of a classic tried and true trope, but I think it's pretty effective here to just show that, he is living through the trauma and living through the guilt of the flooding. And by the way that those bombs went off, the way that the water began to flood, and there was that one shot in particular that's still sticking with me even now, of where the water is going so fast that it just bursts through the windows, and you have to imagine it just killing and drowning everybody in sight immediately. It was devastating to watch. The way that they shot that and filmed that, it was incredible in a horrific kind of way. And I just so appreciated the way that the visuals conveyed the story without having to say a single word. So the opening prologue was so incredibly powerful here, and just devastating, just absolutely devastating. So now we get back to present day. We see Vic with Penguin, we see Vic with Oz, and I really like these conversations here. It's setting up the sort of betrayal at the end of this episode, but the conversations at the beginning where he's Oz is being nice, right? He's like, oh hey, I get it. You need to ask for things, and I'll give you $1,000 a week. And Vic is like, okay, I want 2,000. And Penguin's like, that's what I'm talking about. But no, it's a good line. It's a fun line. And I think it shows the dynamic that they're really warming up to one another, or at least Oz is warming up to Vic, because Vic's life is about to get a whole lot more complicated here. But the dynamic between these two characters, and the fact that not only is Vic I think Vic is the lens through which we should see this show, like our entrance into the show, because I realized if it was just Oz and Sophia, it would be a great, thrilling gang war, crime drama, right? But because we have a character like Vic, the writers are smart enough to understand that now we have an emotional stake in this where, yeah, like Oz is being humanized for what it's worth in certain ways, and he's not just the maniacal bad guy. He has motives and things like that. But if things happen to Oz, we're like, okay, well, he's a bad guy, right? But if things happen to Vic, all of a sudden, it's different now. It's complicated now. And I think that that's a really brilliant thing. Sophia comes into the apartment, and she is still terrifying, just the way that she talks to Vic. We get to see a little bit of emotion in her throughout this episode, which I think it works well to make the parts where she is terrifying even scarier, honestly. But she's crazy scary. I mean, just the fact that he's like, I'm a mechanic, and she's like, really? Why can't you work a lighter? So scary. So scary. I would hate to be in a room with her. I mean, I think that these scenes are just so full of tension. It's one of the things that the show does incredibly well. Then we move on here to, we get a little bit more backstory, actually, as Sophia and Penguin are going to this drug lab here. And Sophia mentions, I think for the first time, that Penguin used to be her driver. And we'll get little layers peeled back as the show continues on. But it's interesting that, Penguin is a character who always felt disrespected and always felt like he was the underling. And he's trying to work his way through the top here by whatever means possible. But he did, kind of start from the bottom as Sophia's driver. And then there was some betrayal that we'll talk about towards the end of this episode. So I think that is, something that is really interesting that they were revealing as well. Then we get to this crime lab, and I guess I would have, I don't know what it was, because I know not to get too much into drugs and whatnot, but we know mushrooms are drugs, psychedelics, right? But it felt a little strange to just see them growing mushrooms. I'm not gonna lie, and yeah, I mean, I think it felt a little bit more abstract in a good way. That later on in the episode they just had vials of the stuff, but yeah, I mean, whatever. It's meant to be a drug lab, and yeah, that's all it is. So anyways, not to dwell on that too much, but we get to see that, and I guess that's interesting as well. Seems like seems like a Scarecrow kind of tactic. I guess Scarecrow is more fear toxins, and this is more about the sort of selling to the masses, if you will. But yeah, and then we get a scene here where Graciela meets Vic again at the apartment, and right away, I actually thought my first instinct was, oh no, Graciela's in trouble, because just the fact that we have a character here who we're meant to be somewhat attached to, where she's related to Vic's character arc, I kind of thought immediately she's probably going to die by the end of this episode. They went a little bit of a different route, still equally as tragic here, but yeah, it's like, the dilemma then is presented of how in the world are you going to leave Vic, because she's like, you could come with me. And it's like, yeah, of course you should go with her. But how? Because he's seen things, and it's like, how in the world are you going to escape the clutches of a madman, calculating madman who knows you've seen everything that he's done? It's crazy. It's crazy. Next scene is Johnny Vitti, who, very interesting character, is what I will say. He threatened Sophia, and immediately I knew, yeah, he's in trouble. And he was in trouble because of what happens a little bit later. Because, you know, it's interesting. There's so much precariousness also going on here. People are lying to one another. When Penguin and Sophia are meeting the sort of intermediary guy in Chinatown, and Penguin's like, oh, of course Vitti's on her side. You have to, immediately in my mind was like, uh-oh, how in the world are they going to pull that off? Turns out Penguin had that file. I totally forgot about that file, and he knew about Vitti being with the wife of Luca's wife. So I totally forgot about that. But yeah, I mean, it's just crazy that it's so precarious because people are lying all the time. It's like, really the question of this show for me at every turn is, how are you going to get out of this, right? How in the world is Penguin going to get out of this mess? So yeah, there you go. Then they have the Penguin and Vic have a lunch conversation, and it's surprisingly emotional and genuine. It almost feels like Oz is truly starting to open up to this guy Vic. And of course, if you asked Oz, he would never admit that he's growing attached to this kid, but he is. By the way, I've never been so uncomfortable when hearing the word steak frites in my life. I know it's not Vic's fault. Obviously, Vic has a stutter, but the way that Penguin was approaching it and was like, nope, just let him say it. It was just a very tense-filled scene in a very completely different way. So steak frites is what I'm going to take out of this anyways. It was a really well acted and really well written scene. But yeah, Oz, look, he's a terrible person, but interesting, to hear some of the points he's making, and not to get too political or anything like that, but it's social commentary, right? He says the American dream, should not be set up so that honest, hardworking people don't get a fair shot. And I think that a lot of us, in fact, almost all of us would agree with that. But the difference here for Oz is that he wants to do it through crime and through a gang war, through whatever means possible. And I think that's sort of the difference here. It's like, are you going to stick up for your morals? Later on, as Vic is talking to Oz in the bathroom, Vic says, my father would be so ashamed. And Oz says something like, it doesn't matter. It's about survival. There's no good. There's no bad. Interestingly, kind of a line in the Thunderbolts trailer. But this is obviously being way more nuanced and way more, just real about it, I guess, in a way, than I think the Thunderbolts will be. Just a guess. Thunderbolts might be also talking about these things as well. I don't know. But anyways, it's really interesting to hear these things from a character that is merciless and will do whatever he can to get to the top, but also just saying honest things, right? Like, of course we think that if a person works hard, they deserve to do well in life, and it just unfortunately just doesn't happen, and often it just doesn't happen. And so I think that is also really interesting social commentary as well. And yeah, it's like, this moment of when Vic is thinking about leaving, Oz is really complimentary of him and saying his father would be really proud. It's such a back and forth here. It's crazy. And yeah, I felt that tension throughout the entire episode. So then Oz and Sophia confront Vitti, very embarrassing for him, and he calls Mr. Zhao the salesperson. I forget the exact name that they were talking about with him, but he makes the call. It's like, as soon as Vitti insults Oz, he just goes after him, and Sophia's watching. Again, another kind of terrifying scene from Sophia. Yeah, we move on to the club scene, and they have a little bit more backstory here with Oz and Sophia, where Sophia is like, hey, you're the reason that I went to Arkham, and they'll talk about this towards the very end of the episode. But Vic is the guy with the bag, and I think what's interesting also is that Vic is going around, and that Sophia and Oz are having their conversation with Mr. Zhao, and you can see how annoyed she's getting, how frustrated she's getting with Oz for taking over the sales pitch to Zhao. And yeah, I mean, I think that this is about a female character, who is so fed up with patriarchal norms and with men telling her what to do all the time, that it's happening again, right? Oz is just taking over the pitch kind of unknowingly, and she's not happy with him. So yeah, Vic is then, he's carrying around the bag, and I think it's so effective. This is one of the most brilliant scenes I've seen in a long time, where the bombs that we saw at the beginning of the episode, which were shot so viscerally, right? Because in the Batman, I think you see it from a distance, right, in the harbor and whatnot. But here you see it up close, and the flashing lights and everything turns into this PTSD for Vic, and it's so incredibly sad. I am becoming more and more and more sympathetic to this character, and the more I watch this show, the more I think this guy is not going to make it out of the show. I'm going to be, if he dies at the end of the show, I am going to be just absolutely devastated, because I'm sure the Penguin will be back in future Batman movies. But Vic, I don't know. I don't want Vic to break bad. He has such a good heart, but he's taking steps towards breaking bad. And if he doesn't break bad, if he has a moment of redemption, I feel like he's gonna die, and it's just gonna break my heart. So I'm mentally preparing for it, but we'll see. We'll have to see what happens here. And then Vic has a conversation with Oz in the bathroom, which is another fantastic scene. Where Oz is like, you think you're my prisoner? And he holds a gun to his head, and he's like, this is what you think it feels like, and it's just it's so sad. But then Oz lets him walk away, and I wonder if Vic really went with Graciela, if Oz would have let him go, because he knows Vic knows a lot of stuff. So that's what's so heartbreaking about this, is because you have this scenario of what if Oz actually let Vic go, and Vic, there's an alternate universe in which obviously we want to see more from the character of Vic, but there's a universe in which I'm so happy that he goes on the bus and he has a really nice 3-episode arc, and I just feel so happy for the character, because whatever Oz is up to in Gotham City, Vic is out there in California making a life for himself. But that's not in the cards. It doesn't look like. And I'm just so devastated. I hope he gets his happy ending. I hope he goes to California at the end of the series. I just don't think it's going to happen. And again, the way that I'm talking about these characters, it shows how invested I am in their stories. I really care about what happens to this kid. He is the best, the person with the best intentions, the best heart, who's just gotten stuck in this terrible situation, and it's so incredibly sad. It's so incredibly sad. So, anyways, he drives over and sees the bus, and he decides to stay ultimately, and we'll get back to that in the very last shots of this episode. But before we do, we get some more backstory between Sophia and Penguin, and I guess from what I'm able to piece together, looks like Carmine, there was something going on between Carmine and Sophia, I guess, and then looks like Penguin, to save his own skin, ratted her out, and because of that, Carmine sent her to Arkham, which is crazy. So it looks like Sophia maybe, they're all part of a gang, sort of a mob mentality, literal mob, I guess, kind of thing, but crime family. That's the word I was looking for, crime family. But maybe it was the case that Sophia was not as bad of a person, before she was sent to Arkham. And obviously, if your own family sends you to Arkham, you're going to have some bitterness about that, so to speak. And I think that that's a really interesting backstory. And then, there's this sort of seemingly genuine apology, but then just as we get that, and just as Sophia is starting to maybe think, maybe I can trust this guy, the Marones show up, and it's just, the pacing in this show is incredible. We're not allowed to sit in that moment of, oh, maybe there's going to be some genuine, partnership between these two characters, because I kind of thought maybe this is a turning point for Penguin. Obviously, bad people doing bad things, but maybe this is the point where Penguin's like, I'm going to be a little more honest, I'm going to be a little more loyal to Sophia. I mean, maybe he's hoping that she'll let him get to the top in some capacity, but, maybe he's going to be a little more loyal to Sophia. And then the Marones show up, and then Victor shows back up, and Penguin escapes, and it's immediately out the window, because Penguin is like, nope, let's leave Sophia behind. And so now we end the episode in a crazy place where, just as Sophia was beginning to trust Penguin, maybe Penguin leaves her for, to the Marones, and the secret's out, I guess. The Marones, I'm sure the Marones will tell Sophia that Penguin was playing the both of them. They're going to go after Penguin. It's only 3 episodes into this show. I can't believe it. I can't believe how good this show is. It is, I'm just at a loss for words every time I watch an episode. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like this isn't the kind of show where I'm going to rewatch it over and over again. It's not the kind of show where I get, I feel such joy and happiness. But it's a show that's so riveting and engaging, and I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed. So guys, what did you think about episode 3 of The Penguin? Was this, your favorite episode of the 3? Was this perhaps one of your favorite episodes of all time? I don't know. I'm having a hard time thinking of many episodes of television. I mean, a couple like the Stranger Things season 4 finale come to mind. That was a brilliant finale. a few episodes of The West Wing. But no, I mean, this is perhaps just one of the greatest single episodes of television that I've ever seen. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought about Penguin episode 3. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode.